The night Loretta Shade saved the man who could have had her killed, she was carrying 2 plates of ossobuco and wearing shoes that had been giving her blisters since March. That detail matters, because nobody ever writes about the shoes. They write about the danger, the glamour, the moment a nobody walks into a room full of somebodies and somehow comes out on top. But they never mention that her feet were swollen from a double shift, that the waistband of her uniform skirt had been digging into her hip since the lunch rush, or that she had exactly $43 in her checking account and a transmission that was threatening to give out on the drive home. Nobody writes about that version of the story. But that's the only version Loretta knew. She had been working at Carnival for 3 years by the time Vincent Moreau walked through the front door with 7 men who didn't look at menus. That's how she knew. The ones who didn't look at menus, they already knew what they wanted, or they didn't care, or both. Either way, they weren't really there for the food. Carnival was the kind of restaurant that had its own gravity. Heavy drapes the color of red wine, candles that cost more per hour than Loretta made, a head chef who'd trained in Lyon and never let anyone forget it, the kind of place where powerful men came to do powerful things while pretending to eat dinner. Loretta had learned, quietly and carefully over 3 years, not to hear things in that dining room. She was good at that, at being invisible, at moving through a room full of people who looked through her, not past her, through her, the way you look through a window, and making sure their water glasses stayed full anyway. At 260 pounds, she was impossible to miss and somehow never seen. That was the particular cruelty of it. Too much body to overlook, and not enough status to be worth looking at. She'd made peace with it the way you make peace with a bad knee. You stop expecting it to feel different. You just keep moving. She was assigned Vincent Moreau's table by accident, or by what she thought was accident. Marco, the floor manager, had a policy of putting his best servers on the private room. The one in the back, past the bar, behind the door that always stayed closed on certain nights. But Sophia had called in sick, and Loretta was next on the rotation, and Marco had looked at her with something like apology before he said her name. "You'll be fine," he said, which meant he wasn't sure. She straightened her apron, picked up her notepad, and went in. The room held 8 men and enough tension to crack the plaster. Most of them she could read in under a second. Men who'd learned to sit with their backs to walls. Men who kept their hands visible on the table, not out of politeness but out of habit. The kind of habit that had probably saved their lives once or twice. Men who watched the door, and then there was the one in the center. Vincent Moreau didn't watch the door. He didn't need to. The men around him watched it for him. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, not old, not young, with the kind of face that had settled into itself like a house that had been built right. Dark hair shot through with silver at the temples. A jaw that looked like it had been set in stone and just covered in skin as an afterthought. He wore a charcoal jacket that hadn't been bought off any rack Loretta had ever walked past, and he sat in the way that certain men sit. Like the chair existed to accommodate him, not the other way around. He was also, she noted clinically, not paying any attention to her. Good. She preferred it that way. She went around the table, quiet and efficient, reciting the evening specials in the flat, professional voice she'd perfected over years of practice. Half the men at the table were murmuring to each other in a language she didn't catch. Something Eastern European, maybe. The other half were watching the man in the center, the way planets watch the sun. She reached Vincent Moreau last. He was reading something on his phone. Without looking up, he said, "What's the best thing on the menu tonight?" "The short rib," she said. "Chef braises it for 6 hours. It's not fancy, but it's the best thing here." He looked up then. She had expected a lot of things. Dismiss boredom. The particular glazed quality men like him sometimes got when they were being polite to people they considered furniture. She had not expected him to actually look at her, not through her, at her. "You didn't try to sell me the tasting menu," he said. "You didn't ask what would impress your clients," she said. "You asked what was best." Those are different questions. Something moved in his expression. Brief, controlled, gone before she could name it. "Short rib," he said, "and a bottle of the 2019 Barolo. Whatever your sommelier recommends. We don't have a sommelier tonight. But the 2019 Barolo is the right call." She paused. "The 2017 is better if you want something that's already opened up." He tilted his head very slightly. "Bring the 2017. She nodded and moved on. It was on her second pass through the room, refilling water and collecting the first-course plates, that she noticed the glass. It was sitting to the left of a man named Holt. She knew him by sight, not by name, had served him twice before, always in the private room, always watchful in that particular practiced way. He hadn't touched his water, he hadn't touched his bread, but he had touched his whiskey. And the whiskey, she realized, was wrong. She couldn't have said exactly how she knew. 3 years of working this room had given her a kind of low-grade hyper-awareness about the tables she served. The glass nearest Vincent Moreau held the same whiskey, same pour, same level, and it looked identical. But there was something in the way the ice had settled, something in the faint oiliness at the surface. She'd grown up around her uncle's bar on the south side of Chicago. She'd watched him pour 10,000 glasses. She knew what whiskey was supposed to look like. She also understood, with sudden and very quiet clarity, that she was the only person in that room who had noticed. She kept moving, kept her face even, set down the last plate and walked back toward the service corridor. In the kitchen, she stood for exactly 10 seconds, with her hands flat on the stainless steel counter, breathing. Think, Loretta. She could do nothing. That was the easiest option. She could finish her shift, go home, let whatever was in that glass happen. She didn't know what was in it. She didn't know who put it there. She didn't know anything, technically. She was a waitress from the West Side with $43 and a dying transmission, and absolutely no business getting involved in whatever was happening in that room. But she knew what the glass looked like, and she knew where it was sitting, and she knew that choosing not to see something wasn't the same as not seeing it. She thought about that for exactly 1 more second. Then she picked up a fresh glass, poured a measure of the same whiskey from the bottle at the service bar, one she'd watched unsealed herself 20 minutes ago, and walked back in. What she did next took less than 4 seconds. She came in from the right side, moving toward Vincent Moreau's end of the table, and she caught the edge of a plate with her elbow. Not hard, just enough. The plate shifted. Loretta caught it. The recovery looked natural, automatic, the kind of thing a server did 20 times a night. But in the recovery, her arm swept the compromised glass off the table. It shattered on the tile floor. Every man in the room looked at her. "I'm so sorry," she said, already crouching to gather the larger pieces, her voice perfectly calibrated to embarrassed professional. "I'll get this cleaned up immediately." "Can I replace your drink, sir?" She set the fresh glass in front of Vincent Moreau as she straightened. He was watching her, not the glass. Her. For 3 full seconds, he didn't say anything. Then he said quietly, "Yes, thank you." She nodded and left to get the dustpan. She didn't expect anything to come of it. That wasn't false modesty. She genuinely, truly did not expect it. She'd made a decision in a kitchen, acted on it, and now it was done. That was the full extent of what she'd imagined. She'd go home, her transmission would probably make that sound again, and she'd lie awake wondering if she'd read the whole situation wrong. She didn't wonder for long. He stopped her on her way back through the room. 40 minutes later, just a slight lift of his hand. Not a wave, more like the gesture of a man who was accustomed to being understood without using many words. She stopped. The rest of the men at the table had gone quiet in the way rooms go quiet when someone important is about to say something. "Sit down," Vincent Moreau said. She blinked. "I'm working, sir." "I know. Sit down anyway." She sat. He looked at her the way she imagined he looked at everything, like he was assessing load-bearing walls, like he was trying to calculate exactly how much weight a thing could hold before it gave way. "You noticed something," he said, not a question. She kept her voice level. "I notice things. That's part of the job." "And when you notice things, what do you do?" She thought about all the years of moving through rooms, being looked through, of learning to make herself useful while making herself invisible, of the $43 and the dying transmission, and every morning she'd driven to work thinking about what she owed and who needed it and what was left over for herself. "Depends on what I notice," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Very small, very contained. "What's your name?" "Loretta Shade." "Loretta," he said it once, like he was storing it somewhere. "You know who I am?" She could have said no. It would have been simpler. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. "And you still?" He paused. "Why?" And there it was, the question the whole night had been building toward, the one she'd been asking herself since she stood in the kitchen, with her hands flat on the stainless steel counter. Why would you save a man like that? A man whose name meant something specific and dark in certain parts of this city. A man who came to private rooms with men who watched the doors. Why would a woman with $43 and sore feet put herself in the middle of something that had nothing to do with her? She didn't give him a rehearsed answer. She wasn't capable of it. She was too tired for anything except the truth. "Because I saw it," she said, "and I could have not seen it. But that's a choice too. Choosing not to see something you've already seen, that makes you responsible for what happens next." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not interested in being responsible for that." The room was very quiet. Vincent Moreau looked at her for a long moment. The kind of moment that felt like it was happening more slowly than the rest of time. Then he said, "Bring me the check." That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. She was wiping down the bar at close, the last of the kitchen staff somewhere in the back, when she heard the main door open. She didn't turn around. She'd been on her feet for 11 hours and her threshold for surprise had fully collapsed. Footsteps. The kind that didn't hurry. "Loretta Shade." She turned. He was alone, which surprised her more than his presence. Men like Vincent Moreau were never alone. "We're closed," she said, automatic. "I know." He crossed the room and sat down at the bar, not across from her, but at the corner, where he could see both her and the door. Old habit, she guessed. "I have a question." "You had a lot of questions earlier. One more." He set his hands flat on the bar surface, unhurried. "What do you want?" She stared at him. "What? In your life? What do you want?" It was such a strange question that she almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because no one had asked her that in so long that the question itself felt foreign, like hearing a word you knew once and had stopped using. "Right now I want to get home before my transmission completely dies," she said. "And after that?" She was quiet for a moment. There was something in the way he was asking. Not like a man who was offering something, not yet. More like a man who was trying to understand what he was dealing with, assessing load-bearing walls again. "I want to go back to school," she said finally. "I dropped out when I was 20. Money. I want to finish." She paused. "I want an apartment where I don't hear the neighbors through the walls. I want—" She stopped. "Why are you asking me this?" "Because tonight you made a decision that most people with a great deal more to gain than you would not have made. And I want to understand what kind of person does that." "The boring kind," she said. "People who do the right thing are usually boring. I haven't found that to be true." She looked at him for a long second. "Who was it in the room tonight?" His expression didn't change. "That's not your concern." "You're right, it's not." She folded the bar towel over the rack. "Then I don't think I have anything else to say." She turned to go. "Halt," he said. She stopped. "The man you're asking about, his name was Holt. He worked for me for 6 years. He paused. "He stopped working for me tonight." She didn't ask what that meant. She already knew what it meant. She turned back to face him. "Why are you telling me that? because you asked, and you deserve an answer." He studied her. "You're not afraid. I'm terrified," she said. "I've been terrified since I noticed the glass, but you're still standing here." "Fear doesn't have to be in charge," she said. "That's something my grandmother told me. You can be afraid and still decide what you're going to do." He looked at her for a long time after that. "Go home, Loretta Shade," he said finally. "Get your transmission looked at." He set a business card on the bar. Not his own, a mechanic's, she realized when she picked it up. "Tell him Vincent sent you. He'll take care of it." "I know you don't need it," he said. "Take it anyway." He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. Without turning around, he said, "You start Monday." She blinked. "I already have a job. You have a better one now." He pushed the door open. "The position requires discretion, attention to detail, and an ability to notice things other people miss." He glanced back just once. "You're already qualified." The door closed behind him. Loretta stood alone in the empty restaurant, holding a mechanic's business card, her feet still aching, the bar wiped clean. She thought about $43. She thought about the transmission. She thought about the 10 years she'd been moving through rooms full of people who looked through her, being useful and invisible and fine. She thought about the question he'd asked. "What do you want?" She set the business card in her apron pocket. "Fear doesn't have to be in charge," she said to no one. Then she turned off the lights. Monday came the way Mondays do, without announcement, without ceremony. The address on the second card he'd left, she'd found it tucked behind the first, was a building in River North that looked like it belonged to a private equity firm or a very serious law practice. All grey stone and clean lines, and a lobby that was trying very hard to look boring. She walked in wearing the best thing she owned, which was a navy blazer she'd bought at a consignment shop in 2019 and a pair of slacks that almost matched. The woman at the front desk looked up and said, "Miss Shade?" before Loretta had said a single word. "Yes, Mr. Moreau is expecting you. 14th floor." The elevator was silent. The 14th floor was mostly glass and controlled silence, a long corridor with offices on one side and a view of the city on the other. A man she didn't recognize intercepted her at the elevator doors. Broad-shouldered, dark suit, the specific quality of stillness that people develop when their job involves paying close attention at all times. "Mrs. Shade," he said. "I'm Rourke. I handle security for Mr. Moreau's office operations. Nice to meet you, Rourke. Before you go in, I need to explain what this position involves." He walked her to a small conference room, closed the door, and sat across from her with his hands folded. "You'll be managing Mr. Moreau's private calendar and personal correspondence. You will have access to information that is sensitive in nature. You will be expected to remember things without writing them down, to be present without being noticed, and to exercise judgment without being told how. That's what I've been doing for 3 years, she said. For a lot less money, I assume. Something crossed his face that might have been the beginning of a smile. Significantly less money, yes, and if I see something I shouldn't. You handle it the way you handled it Friday night. She was quiet for a moment. Does that happen often? Less than you'd think, he said. More than we'd like. She nodded slowly. What's the actual job? Officially, you're his executive assistant. Personal scheduling, correspondence, discretionary management of his private affairs. The real job is that Mr. Moreau is surrounded by people who tell him what he wants to hear and people who want something from him. He needs someone who does neither, and he thinks I'm that person because I knocked over one glass. He thinks you're that person because you knocked over a glass to replace it before anyone noticed what you were doing, and then answered his question without once looking at the door to calculate your exit. She thought about that. When do I start? You already started, Rourke said. The moment you sat down. The first weeks were strange in the way that all real things are strange. Not dramatic, just unfamiliar. quiet offices and early mornings, and a job that required her to be constantly, invisibly present. She learned the architecture of Vincent Moreau's days, the meetings he ran on time and the ones he let run long because they were worth it. The associates he trusted and the ones he kept close for different reasons. The rhythm of a world that operated according to its own rules, mostly invisible, entirely unforgiving. She also learned slowly that he noticed things too, not the way she did. She catalogued sensory details, the small wrongnesses that preceded larger ones. He noticed people, the way someone's posture changed when they were calculating instead of listening. The fraction of a second's hesitation before a man answered a question he'd already decided how to answer. He read rooms the way she read glasses of whiskey, and he was very rarely wrong. What he apparently couldn't do, Rourke told her one morning in the corridor, was trust his own staff. "They're loyal to him," Rourke said carefully, "but loyalty and honesty are not the same thing. They tell him what keeps them safe. Not always what's true. That's a dangerous way to operate," Loretta said. "That's why you're here." She thought about that for a long time. The crisis came 12 weeks in, on a Thursday afternoon in November, when the sky over Chicago was the color of dirty aluminum, and she was at her desk reviewing a calendar that had just gotten considerably more complicated. A man named Carver had been feeding information to a competing operation on the East Coast. She didn't know this at first. She knew it obliquely, in the way she knew things. She'd noticed that certain meetings with Carver produced decisions that seemed to move in directions nobody had intended. She'd noticed that information shared in Carver's presence had a habit of surfacing in inconvenient ways afterward. She'd noticed that he laughed a half-second too late at Vincent's jokes, which wasn't a crime, but was the kind of detail that bothered her, the way a picture hung slightly crooked bothered her. She brought it to Rourke. She didn't go to Vincent directly. She didn't have enough yet, and she understood by now that evidence in this world needed to be airtight before it was said aloud. "Tell me what you have," Rourke said. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's not enough to move on, I know. I want to get more." "How? He doesn't notice me," she said simply. "Nobody in this building notices me. I've been here 12 weeks, and I still get mistaken for catering in the elevator." She met Rourke's eyes. "That's not a complaint. That's a resource." He looked at her steadily. Then he picked up his phone. "I need to make a call," he said. "Don't go anywhere." What happened next took 9 days. She did what she'd always done. She moved through rooms. She was present without being noticed. She listened without appearing to listen, and saw without appearing to look. She was, as she had been for the better part of a decade, perfectly invisible, and she turned that invisibility into the most precise and damning document she had ever assembled in her life. The meeting where she presented it to Vincent Moreau was not dramatic. He read through it in complete silence. Twice, the second time more slowly. The only sound was the hiss of radiator heat and rain beginning against the windows. When he finished, he set it down and looked at her across the desk. "How long?" he asked. "Based on the pattern, probably 6 months before I started. Maybe longer." He was quiet for a moment. "And you put this together in 9 days. I had a lot of information. I just needed to organize it. 9 days, he said again, almost to himself. She waited. He stood, not abruptly, but with the particular deliberateness of a man who had made a decision and was now moving toward it. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain for a long moment. "You know what happens next," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. Does that bother you?" She thought about Carver, about 6 months of someone she'd passed in the corridor every day, who'd eaten lunch in the same room, who'd stood in meetings and smiled and said the right things while systematically doing the wrong ones. "What bothers me," she said carefully, "is that it went on this long, that nobody caught it, that the information was there and nobody was looking at it right." He turned from the window. "I was looking at it wrong," he said, and the admission cost him something. She could tell by the way it came out, flat and clean, the way people speak when they're forcing honesty through gritted teeth. I was looking at people I trusted. I should have been looking at the information. She nodded. You should have been doing this from the beginning, he said. Not serving tables. I needed the money, she said, and I didn't know this existed. Something shifted in his face. What do you need? What do you mean? Right now, practically. What do you need? She thought about it. The apartment where she could hear the neighbors through the walls. The community college application she'd started filling out 3 times and set aside. The list of things she'd been keeping in the back of her mind for so long that they'd started to feel less like goals and more like memories of something she'd once wanted. I told you, she said. School, an apartment. Something to show for the next 10 years. That's it? That's enough. He looked at her for a long time. That's not enough, he said. Not for this. Not for what you just put on my desk. I'm not negotiating, she said. I'm telling you what I want. He almost smiled. It was such a fractional expression that she almost missed it. A slight softening at the corner of his mouth that disappeared before it fully formed. I know, he said. That's why I believe you. There was a meeting 3 weeks later. The whole of Vincent Moreau's operation assembled in a conference room that cost more per square foot than Loretta's apartment building. 12 men and 4 women who ran pieces of an empire that officially didn't exist, sitting around a table that held coffee, water, and the specific tension of people who knew something had changed and weren't yet sure how. She hadn't expected to be in it. She'd been arranging the schedule for the following week in the outer office when Vincent appeared in the doorway. Come in, he said. She looked up. I'm not come in, Loretta. The room went quiet when she walked through the door. Not hostile, careful, the particular silence of people recalibrating their understanding of a situation. Vincent Moreau stood at the head of the table. Most of you, he said, have worked with me long enough to know that I don't make speeches. I say what needs to be said and I move on. He paused, letting the room hold the silence for a moment. 3 months ago, a woman I'd never met saved my life because she noticed something in a glass of whiskey that every single person in this room missed, including me. Nobody spoke. 6 weeks ago, she identified and documented a security compromise that had been operating for the better part of a year, with no authorization, no resources, no staff. He looked at Loretta, not with performance, not playing to the room, just directly at her, the way he always did. She did it because it needed to be done, and she was the person who saw it clearly. She felt every eye in the room shift toward her and stayed very still, the way she'd learned to stay still in difficult moments, not bracing, just present. Loretta Shade is now Director of Internal Intelligence, Vincent said. Her assessments are final. Her access is complete. Any person in this room who has a problem with that can come to me directly. The last sentence was delivered at a register that made clear no one would be coming to him directly. That's all. He moved to sit. The room exhaled. From 3 seats down, a woman she recognized as handling West Side operations looked at Loretta with an expression that was still sorting itself between suspicion and respect. Director, she said, testing the word. Same as always, Loretta said. I'm just going to keep noticing things. Later, weeks later, months later, in the particular quiet of an office that was now hers, overlooking the city that had looked through her for the better part of a decade, she would think about what it meant to be invisible. Not the ache of it. She'd carried that long enough to know its weight, and she was done cataloging it. But the mechanics, the actual structural fact of it. She had spent years learning to move through rooms without disturbing them, learning to be present without being seen, learning to notice everything because she understood, in the way you understand things you've never been taught, that people who are ignored tend to see more than people who are watched. She had thought that was a deficit, a condition to be managed. She understood now that it was the thing she'd been built toward. Every restaurant, every double shift, every moment of being talked over and looked through and left standing in the doorway of rooms she hadn't been invited into. It had been practice, not cruel, not wasted. Practice. The view from the 14th floor on a clear morning was something. Chicago spread out below in its winter gray and amber. The lake beyond it, flat and enormous. The whole complicated city going about its business without knowing she was up here watching. She thought about what her grandmother had told her. Fear doesn't have to be in charge. She'd spent a long time being afraid of the wrong things, of being too much and not enough at the same time, of the ways a body like hers was supposed to take up space and all the ways the world suggested it shouldn't, of what it meant to want things and not be the kind of person the world expected to get them. She wasn't afraid of those things anymore. She had a coffee on her desk that was still hot. She had a calendar blocked out through the end of the quarter. She had an application to Northwestern's evening program sitting in her desk drawer, already filled out, waiting for her signature. She signed it. Outside, the lake caught the light the way it always did in late morning, briefly, brilliantly, like it wasn't sure it was supposed to. Loretta Shade picked up her coffee, turned back to her desk, and went to work.